So now, lead game designer from North Current, and for those who don't know it, it's one of the biggest Baltic game developers in Baltic states. He will talk with us about tutorial and what to do with it and some practical examples, I guess. Okay, so Kiril Uljanov, please come.
Hello, my name is Kiril, and today I'll speak about welcoming the player in general, learning process in particular, and mostly about the tutorials, how probably the most attentive of you could have noticed from the title of presentation. But before I move to the topic, I would like to introduce myself. I am a lead game designer at one of NotCurrent's development departments, and no, NotCurrent is not a travel agency, as you might think from the logo or the name. We are a publisher and developer of mobile games. Our main office is located in Vilnius, Lithuania, not to be confused with Latvia. And recently we have established a development studio in Warsaw, Poland. And as a publisher, we are in constant collaboration with many studios from different countries. And as a developer, you may have heard of us from such titles as Cooking Fever, Happy Chef series, 101 game series, Game Banjo, and many others. So, with that covered, let's proceed. Imagine you release a game. Today, with literally millions of games out there and hundreds coming out every day, it must be really scary. Will your game lure the player or fend him off? Will the player understand what to do and how to play? The first impression is very, very important. Because if the player won't get hooked, he's got vast variety of our games to choose from. And what makes that impression? What the player will see and interact with first when he launches your game? What obstacles does the player have to overcome before actually playing the game? And please note that I am not talking about some in-game obstacles, but something between the player and the game itself. And if the player won't get past it, he won't play a game at all. Let's figure out what these obstacles are and how can we help the player to overcome them. Well, actually, there are quite a lot of them. Internet connection and download speed, game size and available space on the device, clear or clumsy interface. But today, I would like to focus mainly on the learning process. And usually, players are being guided by tutorials. There are a lot of different types of them. Each got its merits and flaws depending on the genre of the game it is being used in, and certainly on the quality of the execution. But moving any further, I would like to say I didn't want my presentation to be a promotion of our games, so screenshots from different games will be used, not only developed by us, but also by other studios. So, two extremes in the process of guiding the player can be met. Either the player will understand nothing due to lack of information or poorly executed guidance on how to play, or the player will be overwhelmed with or bored by extensive training. In either case, the outcome for you as a publisher or a developer will be quite unpleasant. The player will understand your game. Also, remember that different types of players will play your game, from the extreme professionals to completely novice ones. Which brings us to an inner dilemma: how to accommodate both. And as I said, there are many different types of tutorials, but I personally would like to outline the following three types. First one is tutorial by exposition. This type is actually a successor of paper game manuals which used to exist in the early era of video games. Controls are usually covered by this type. The second type is training room, and it is actually what it sounds like: a room or a level or sequence of such which works the player through actions they need to know in order to play. And the third type, contextual tutorial, is practically the mix of two previous types where information is spread up and presented more gradually during the gameplay. Let's speak about each type in more detail. Tutorial by exposition consists of showing or telling the player something outside of actual gameplay. This is the easiest type to implement and one of the least effective. And a common mistake is made trying to put too much information, literally everything the player should know or ever will need, in the very beginning. So in that case, the player will be overwhelmed and won't remember anything that he just read, if he read it at all. Especially for more complex games, this type could easily turn into a nightmare. What you see here is an actual tutorial, unchanged in any way, which I personally made for a game during one of the game jams. It was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but today it is funny how my experience can be used as an example of bad tutorial by exposition. As you can see, there is a lot of text. It is not very clear which message corresponds to which game mechanic, and all in all, it's quite confusing. And now, when I look at it, it reminds me of this. Has anybody of you ever seen something like this? And has anyone ever read the whole thing from the beginning to the end? No? Thought so. These are usually skipped. And no wonder, because these are technical instructions. And nobody really likes technical instructions to read them, unless we have absolutely nothing to do. Familiar scene, isn't it? So, games should be fun and engaging from the very beginning. And reading a lot of informative messages is not fun nor engaging. So don't waste your time to write a lot of text which no one will read. Otherwise, you will get irritated players who won't see your game behind the wall of text. But if you see no other way but to use this type, try to separate the information and present it by short, little, easily adaptable portions. For example, in this game tutorial on controls is presented by very short messages and is very clear. And also try to teach your players through action. Everything is better learned by practice, and games are no exceptions. And the next type, the training room, tries to accomplish that. It is a section of gameplay which guides the player through mechanics needed to be known in order to play. But it has a similar mistake to the one with tutorial by exposition is made, trying to put every mechanic, every single one, even those which will be introduced way later in the game, in the very beginning. So in that way, the player will eventually forget what he was learning during the training room. For example, in quite lengthy training room of this game, somewhere near the end of it, we are introduced with this mechanic to levitate objects and to throw them over a distance. But only after some hours of actual gameplay, this mechanic is first introduced in the game. So by that time, the player will practically forget that that mechanic ever existed in the game. So try to spread the information more thoroughly through the gameplay. But in my opinion, this type could work out if the training room will be not the separate part of the gameplay, but the actual gameplay itself. If the first levels could be called the tutorial levels, but the player won't notice it and won't feel somewhat cheated that he is not playing the game yet, but has to complete also tedious training level. For example, this is a screenshot of the game Portal, and you won't believe it. It's a game about portals. And there, the training room was incorporated into the gameplay also well that it is being told that almost 80% of the game is tutorial, but nobody noticed it because it was so well incorporated in the game itself. So, as I said, try to spread the information and incorporate it more organically, which the next type tries to accomplish. The contextual tutorial is basically a mix of storybook exposition and the training room, but the information is in the game more organically. But also it has some flaws. For example, if you tell constantly what to do, how to do, where to do, and when to do, you can insult the player. After all, players are not that stupid. Also, by constantly leading the player by the hand and then just suddenly stop, you can left the player confused and he will not know what to do next. Also, very important thing about this type of tutorial is timing, which is telling the player something important when he is ready. Otherwise, he may not understand it or forget about it. For example, in our series of games, The Happy Chef, we have general upgrades and kitchen aids. And when we introduce this upgrade screen to the player, we say that apart from general upgrades, there are also kitchen aids, but they are bought for the special currency, the golden ladles. But in the very beginning of the game, the player doesn't have enough to buy one, so later almost every player forgot about those kitchen aids. So we had to put an additional message, which was shown at the exact moment the player had the right amount of golden ladles to buy his first kitchen aids, and that message simply reminded that, hey, look, don't forget, there are kitchen aids, and now you can buy one. So, with the most commonly used types of tutorials covered, I would like to speak about something which is usually called the no tutorial, this mythical creature. And it could work in two ways. The actual absence of any learning process. And it could work out for some games. For example, this one. Has anybody of you played it? If not, you should try. It's a good game. It was quite popular in my young ages. So, there was no tutorial, but it was very clear how to play because the game was self-explanatory. On the other hand, we have this game. Anybody heard of it? Oh, I'm surprised. It's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And there were a lot more mechanics, a lot more interactions, but no tutorial of any kind. So it was totally unclear what is going on. And no wonder this game didn't become as popular as Tetris did. But even though with seemingly absence of tutorial, the learning process could be hidden in many ways. And let me quickly cover some of them. Briefing dialogues could be used not only to unfold the story, but also to tell something important about the gameplay. For example, in this screenshot from our game, which is currently in development, the story character says that that island is too far away and we cannot build a bridge that big. And this message is immediately followed by a contextual tutorial message, and another story character says that, hey, just build a shipyard to sail to nearby islands. And in this way, the tutorial is smoothly incorporated into briefing dialogues. Also, in-game tasks or quests could be designed in such a way that by doing something completely mandatory, the player will learn something about the gameplay mechanics. In this screenshot from the same game, among the tasks, you can see build lumber mill. And by doing that, the player will get to know buildings in general, and also will learn that the resources could be obtained not only from different sources on the level, but from such buildings. And support animations could be used to indicate something which can or cannot be done. For example, in this short video, you see if we try to do something on the other side of the river, the broken bridge will highlight, telling the player that something needed to be done with that bridge if he wants to reach that side of the river. And support animations in many ways are better than constantly popping up messages. Last but not least, the gameplay itself could be designed in such a way that only by playing, the player will actually learn how to play. Yet again, quite popular game. Believe me, it's popular. And here, this is the very beginning of the game, and everything is designed to teach the player something. For example, that mushroom which pop-ups will drop, bounce off the tube, and inevitably get to the player character. So the player will know what the mushrooms are bonuses and what bonuses do. And in conclusion, I would like to sum up some major points of my presentation, which are: try to minimize the amount of text and to teach your player through action. Make the tutorial the actual part of the gameplay, not a separate section. Think of the tutorial from the very beginning and not when you have the complete product and then start to wonder, how do I put tutorial in this game? Mind your timing and portioning. Make the tutorial skippable. Don't forget that different types of players will play your game, and some may be way too familiar with the genre of the game, of your game, and they don't need any guidance at all. Make the information about the game accessible. Even if the player skipped or missed or didn't understand the tutorial, it is good if he has an opportunity to look something up in, let's say, help of the game. Make sure it is clear, and by saying that, I mean you as a developer may know your game way too well, and your learning process is very clear for you, but totally not clear for player. So test your tutorials on people who are not familiar with your game. Use the analytics during the soft launch wisely to see what steps of tutorials were skipped or where the player may stuck. And the question was tutorial or no tutorial. So I would say for developer, it is yes, tutorial. So to make it so that for the player, it will be no tutorial. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we have a Q&A session now. So the first question. Anyone? Okay, I can see one question here and probably there.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is about skippable tutorials. I've had that debate with several times with other people in video game teams, where, especially for free-to-play games, you might not want to make the tutorial skippable in some instances to avoid the risk of a drop-off point later of the player believing that he can skip the tutorial because he knows the game, he knows the mechanic, he knows the controls because he's played that before, and then realizes that he actually doesn't know it that well and drops out of the game instead of going through the tutorial. So, what's your opinion on that in that debate?
Well, every game is unique, and those were not the to-do things, but recommendations. And of course, if you see no other way but to make the tutorial mandatory, because if you are afraid that otherwise it will be worse for the player. So yeah, probably in some particular special cases, it is better to make the tutorial unskippable if it is very important for your game. But in general, there should be an opportunity to skip the tutorial if the player wants to explore everything by himself. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, second question.
So, how important do you think it is to make the tutorial enjoyable, like a very biased experience for the player? Not just the regular game loop, but like an enhanced version of the core game loop within the tutorial?
Well, I think the answer is quite obvious, because games in general should be fun, don't they? And each part of the game should be fun. So the tutorial is a part of the game. So if the tutorial is fun, so the player will start having fun already from the beginning, and he's learning, having fun, so he's enjoying the game. So of course the tutorial should be fun and enjoyable.
Okay, another question.
I'm Asi Epstein. I'm a developer, game developer. I have a question. If there's a game mechanic, you talked about it, which comes in later in the game, do you try to include it in the tutorial, the early tutorial, or do you try to like spread out, like you said, various tutorial stages? Because like you said, somebody can see like the classic example of this is Half-Life Turbo Jump, which was introduced in the tutorial, wasn't used until the last phase of the game, and then nobody remembered it.
Yes, well, I think the answer lies in your question, because if you teach the player about the mechanic of the game early, which will be used way later, so it's probably the player will forget about it. So it's better to tell the player about something really important, about something new mechanic, before some time, but short time it will be introduced, or exactly at the right moment it is introduced. But yet again, each game and each mechanic is unique, so try different types, test and see which type and which method works better, especially for your game and for that particular mechanic.
Okay, and we have time for one last question. Anyone? Okay, right here.
Hi, my name is Shelly and I'm a product manager. I was wondering, what is your opinion about learning through failure? For example, if we take Tetris, if you don't get it right the first time, then within a minute you would, as opposed to feeding the player with instructions and, you know, having a more complex process of learning. So what would be your opinion? Like, how can we stretch learning through failure?
Well, in my personal opinion, casual games are maybe not the right place for learning through failure, because it is different type of players, and they just want to play and everything to be clear and to be successful and more successful, and everything just comes and they're beating level after level. And in my personal opinion, learning through failure is good, but probably for more hardcore players who like the challenge, who bring it on, I will do it everything myself and don't teach me at all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, applauses, yes.